Hey, Aaron, how you doing today, bud?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I am doing lovely. Well, for your new book, In Defense of Ska, I figured we would jump just right into it. And I want you to give everybody listening your elevator speech, which basically means if you are in an elevator, you've got about a minute to a minute and a half to tell these people about your book and convince them on why they should buy it. So tell me, Aaron, why should I go out and pre order your book?
Okay, I got it. So ska is a diverse genre with a rich, compelling history and a sustained, loyal audience that has been there for decades. Yet, for a lot of people, it's just a joke, or they have a very oversimplified view of it as this silly trend that came and went in the 90s. So, I think ska deserves the respect and critical analysis that most other genres at this point have gotten. And I think the best way to do that is to push back on a lot of these narratives that have basically insisted that ska is wacky music, and also educate people on all of the ska bands from the 50s to the present that maybe aren't as known or maybe fall outside of those stereotypes, because I feel like there's more of them than there are the goofball white guy with fedoras from Orange County ska bands that everyone seems to think is makes up the majority of the genre. So that's basically the mission of this book.
I'll tell you, if I hadn't already pre-ordered it, which I have, I would go and pre-order it again. That sounds good. And I would like to point out that all of the California white guy bands with fedoras, they're still good, but they're just a little tiny piece of that whole thing. You're exactly right.
Yeah,
Um,
there's no diss on those bands. I just
mhm.
think it's just weird how they are everybody's viewpoint of what the genre is. That people don't have a full perspective of what ska has been and continues to be.
I agree 100% wholeheartedly. Do you have a particular favorite ska song that you would like me to play?
Tough question, but I think my answer will be to pick the song that I tend to show people that either are unfamiliar with ska or don't know, only know the big hits, and that is "On My Radio" by the Selector.
All right, let's do that. On My Radio by the Selector. You're hearing it here on EAV Radio on Garage 71. And we will pause there.
Great,
Then we will come into that was perfect.
thank you.
Um, I can tell you're prepared, Aaron. I like it. For break number two, again, I'll ask you one question, and then we'll stop, and then I'll ask you the second question because I'll end up splitting it in between two different places in the set.
Sure,
Cool.
sounds great.
All right. So here we go. In three, two, one. All right, back with Aaron, the author of the upcoming book In Defense of Ska. Aaron, this question you're going to hate because it's way too big, and
Okay.
you could probably do a whole college course or a couple college courses on it. But in order to get everybody's idea and kind of what you said in your elevator speech, try and give me a definition of what is ska.
Oh, yes, yes.
I
Well,
apologize,
oh,
but
sure, sure. Um, well, let's just start with saying that ska, as most people know, ska evolved, or it began in Jamaica in the 50s, but it was fusion music right from the get-go. It was a combination of the kind of the gritty R&B stuff that they were hearing, jazz music, and the traditional mento folk music. So with that, some common elements that came from that was the one drop beat, the walking bass line, and the upbeats on the guitars. Um, but ska was revived in late 70s England, and at that time it continued to become fusion music by mixing with 70s British punk rock. And as it's evolved and gone global, it has only expanded that. It's become meshed with every kind of genre, and because of that, a lot of people do debate about if something is or isn't ska. So I think that when we decide what is and isn't ska, I tend to be a little bit more liberal on my perspective, and obviously those original components the one drop, the walking bass, the upbeats. Those are good benchmarks, but I don't necessarily require them to be ska because it is fusion music. And now here's the thing about ska music: everything from two tone on. I One time I had a conversation with a Jamaican friend of mine who plays reggae and ska music, and I asked him what he thought of two tone. He said, "Oh, it's great. I like it, but we kind of think of it as rock music." So
Mm.
anything that isn't Jamaican ska is going to be not going to follow the exact definition of ska anyway. So I feel like being liberal with the definition is the only way to go about it.
I like you looking at it like that, because I tend to do the same thing where, okay, it's not traditional ska, or even it's not traditional two tone, but there are you can see or hear the ska elements in songs and say this is ska influenced. I'm going to put it in the category of ska.
Yeah,
I like that.
and even two tone. I mean, those bands. I mean, it was part of their mission to be really diverse in their perspective, and not even to be strictly ska. I mean, those bands moved away from ska almost immediately. So I think it's safe to just to be really broad with our definition of ska.
I like that. I like that. And we'll break there. And I have no idea what song I'll play for that, but I'll figure something out and put it in. And then we'll start with question 2 for break 2 in 3, 2, 1. Back with Aaron, the author of the upcoming book, In Defense of Ska. So, Aaron, I can answer this question for me, but how did you start your journey down the ska rabbit hole? What hooked you and got you into this?
So back when I was in high school, I was really into underground music, I guess you could say. I just was really fascinated by music that was not on mainstream radio. And in California, the Bay Area, I was really intrigued with the bands that were playing in clubs. Most of those were like the funk bands, like Primus and Mr. Bungle. These are before they got big.
Mm-hmm.
And so a friend of mine said, "You got to check out this band called Skank and Pickle." And I was like, okay. And I went to the show in 1992. It was at a club in Santa Clara, California called One Step Beyond, which, by the way, funny coincidence, not a ska club. And Skank and Pickle, didn't know what it was, but I was totally blown away by it. I was blown away by multiple aspects of the show. I loved the theatrics of the show. This was like early Skank and Pickles, so they were wild.
Out there.
Yeah, it was like a circus show. It was like bass player was on a unicycle. He would have a wig on, and at one point he ripped it off, to show that he was bald. Mike Park did a bit before he played his song Asian Man, where he would call upon all the Asians in the crowd to get on stage and dance with him during the song. They had signs for one of the songs, but the audience too, I was impressed with the audience. The audience was everybody, not just ethnicity wise, but style wise. There was no uniform. It was like metalheads, punk rockers, just kind of people in shirts and in shorts. There was like no kind of person there, and it was very, very inviting and welcoming. And it wasn't that same kind of intimidating vibe that you get. Like even when I was into those funk bands like Primus and stuff, like pre big label, audience was kind of intimidating and kind of tough.
You can find cliques, kind of.
Yeah, but totally Skank and Pickle show. It was like everybody was welcome. The band was wacky, but they also had an anti-racist message, very overtly so.
Mm-hmm.
Like they didn't, they said we're anti-racist. It wasn't even like hinted at. It was overt. So. And then the music itself, I wasn't familiar with ska before, but I really liked how it was catchy, fun music, and it was really energetic, but it wasn't that angry thing that you normally find with energetic music. It wasn't like angry punk rock or metal, which I didn't really connect with at that age, but I really connected with the energy of ska music.
Well, on that point, what I always like is you could have, because there are some really good songwriters with depressing, sad, emotional songs, but they're still bouncy. and
Yeah.
and they feel good when it's ska. And I think that's one aspect of the music. You can have a really serious song but still have that upbeat feeling with it, which is, you don't get in a lot of places.
Yeah, it's
So,
cathartic. Yeah.
well, let's play some Skank and Pickle. I'll pick a song by them, and here's some Skank and Pickle on EAV Radio on Garage 71. Good.
Nice.
Going on to break number 3. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Back with Aaron again. Now, Aaron, you have a lot of stories from bands throughout this whole book, which I absolutely loved reading about.
Thank
And
you.
in this break, I'm going to ask you to pick 2 of those. So what is one of your favorite stories that you told in this book that you really enjoyed finding out about and researching?
Well, one of the things I enjoyed about writing this book was that I decided at some point that I didn't the stories that I told didn't have to be important in the bigger scope of things. Maybe they would be, maybe they wouldn't be. But if they were an interesting story, I would put them in. And one of the stories that really has no importance on the bigger scheme of ska at all, but that I just was so fascinated with is the story of Let's Go Bowling and how their van got shot up one night after a gig in Riverside, California in 1998. So the story behind this too is that I remember at the time, Mike Park, I was friends with Mike Park from Skank and Pickle. Him and I became friends after I became a fan. I became friends with him. I remember one point he just told me, he's like, "Oh, Let's Go Bowling got their van shot up." And I was like, "Really? That's crazy." He's like, "Yeah." And then that just kind of, that was it. That's all I remember. And then
Yeah, and that and if you want to hear about the story of their van getting shot up, you need to go pre-order In
yeah.
Defense of Ska right now, because I've read it. It's actually that was a good story. I really enjoyed that because I hadn't heard that one before. So let's
So yeah,
actually play some Let's Go Bowling now. What do you
okay.
say?
Sure. Okay.
Get some Let's Go Bowling here. And coming back from that, let me see where I am on my notes. Okay, and 3, 2, 1. And we're back again. Great story from Let's Go Bowling. Do you have another story that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about Ska Sucks, the infamous ska diss track from Propagandhi. So this song was like, Propagandhi were a punk band and they had one ska song and it was called Ska Sucks. And back in the day, everyone in ska knew the song. They either thought it was funny or they hated it. So I researched this song and I could never get an interview with Chris Hanna of Propagandhi, but I found an interview he did with Turned Out a Punk on that show. And the story, which I'd heard rumors of but couldn't officially confirm, was that it was never intended to be a ska diss track. It was actually dated back to the late 80s when they were still an underground band in Winnipeg, and they were just plagued with Nazis coming to their show and just causing problems and not really sure how to deal with it. They were advised by other bands in other cities, hey, punch them. They said, just punch them, they'll go away. But Chris said, well, I'm not really a violent person, so I'm going to write this song, Ska Sucks, and I'm just going to annoy them, and I'm going to sort of let it be known that they're not welcome here. And that's the history behind Ska Sucks. And it took on a life of its own because in the 90s, ska became mainstream. It wasn't mainstream when he wrote it, but it became mainstream. So it just became sort of the anthem of everybody who hated that ska was mainstream had this song now, Ska Sucks.
Interesting. Well, let's play Ska Sucks by Propagandhi. You're here on EAV Radio. If I can find that song. Do you know if it's available anywhere? I'm sure I can find it online.
It's on it's on their first big album from Fat Records.
Yeah, I'll be able to get it then. That won't be an issue. Sweet. All right. Coming in to block number 4. In 3, 2, 1. Last block, last question that I have for Aaron Carnes, the author of the upcoming book In Defense of Ska. Throughout the book, Aaron, you talk about the whole theme of unity and togetherness. You already mentioned it a little bit in this interview of just people and from all groups and all cliques just coming together and being welcome. And I tend to agree with that is a facet that ska music has that I haven't seen in any other type of music, really. Why do you suppose that happens with ska music?
I think that there's two main reasons. The first reason is that when ska was revived by Two Tone, by the Specials and the other bands on Two Tone, the message of anti-racism and multiculturalism was so baked in to the whole thing that it became tied to the music in a way that it will always be part of the music. And it's true for bands that are silly, that don't sing anti-racist lyrics. They're connected to it. They're aware of it. It's a legacy that ska is for everybody and ska is anti-racist. So I think that's the first reason. The second reason, I think, is that because ska is not been like seen as cool music, it's always kind of like outcast and misfits, weirdos is kind of the view that it's given in culture. I think that there's something about that people band together and people sort of fight the elitism, and they say, well, we invite everybody. We're okay with everybody being part of this because we kind of know what it's like to be thought of as being kind of these nerdy geeks.
It attracts that, where, you know, I feel maybe not, I feel out of place sometimes, or I don't fit in with everybody. So I come here and hear, you know, the music brings you in, and then you're welcomed by everybody.
And then I think you also welcome people because you know what it feels like to not necessarily be welcomed elsewhere.
I like that very, very much, and tend to agree with you 100%. I remind everybody, the book is called In Defense of Ska by Aaron Carnes. It is by Clash Books. You can pre-order it online. It is only $16.95. It would be a great birthday present for somebody. It is going to, if you pre-order it, it will ship sometime in April. It's technically going to be released in May of 2021. Aaron, thank you so much for chatting with me today. And to let everybody else know that I'm going to get together with my boy Dan, who you know I've done interviews with before, and Phil, and we're going to do a longer, more in-depth interview that we'll release coming up a little earlier next year. So be on the lookout for that. I just wanted to get get it out there and get you all excited and get you thinking about this book. So Aaron, thanks for stopping by and chatting with me.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Anything to promote the ska. I'm with you 100% on that. Take care. Have a good one.
All righty.